Like, I remember it was like so vividly, like we absolutely were like nuking customer data. So I actually think you guys, I'll just open it up. You guys will remember this one. I mean, every incident at Wavefront was kind of memorable because like somehow they were always all hands on deck. But this one was especially memorable because this was one of the main times where I can't even remember how this was surfaced up, but it was the one where BCS was just randomly deleting the entire memory tier for a customer. Do you guys remember that? I think, Vasily, you would remember it was the C space was getting completely nuked. And we knew that there was an errant, like I'm trying to remember how we discovered it. I think some alarms were firing or something. And at some point, like Brent gets online and he looks at the memory tier and he's like, the C space is gone. Like, and it's like literally the chart is like 14 gigs of data. And then like within the next instant, it was down to 0. And we had no idea what would cause that. We didn't even have pathways in our code that could delete data that we were aware of.
Yeah, I don't remember how we found it. I think it was like a customer. It had to be a customer noticing, because we I don't think we even had like exposed telemetry. Like we had telemetry, but we didn't have any alerts.
No alerts,
right?
Like
by like number of rows in C space or things like that, right? So like sudden changes.
Yeah.
Was it like an unbounded end key delete?
So I'm trying to remember. So what I remember,
I don't remember this one in detail.
Yeah, this one it lasted multiple days, is what I remember. And because I remember it lasted for multiple days because when I went to bed, we were giving William and the India team instructions like, hey, if you see it happen, you need to immediately fail over, because we had turned the flags on to dump all data out of memory tier directly to SSD. So we weren't running anything in memory while we were ingesting their data. And so I remember it happened a couple more times overnight where they had to like fail over. I think it affected, I don't know if we can say customer names, but I know it affected and I can't remember who the other customer was it affected. But I remember Brent having realized that he had made a build that did do some delete and cleanup. But he was like, there's no way it could have called this path. Like, there's no way it could call this branch.
And,
we were like,
and of course it did.
Yeah, and of course it did. So we're like, is it a cosmic ray that flipped the like an if statement? Like, I remember it was like so vividly, like we absolutely were like nuking customer data. But
and it was like a custom build running, I think, on one of the nodes.
Yes, and I remember because we had no way of knowing there was a custom build running on the particular node, because Brent had gone in and done the Brent thing where he made a build and he pushed it. Yeah, exactly. You know, Jason, he pushed out a custom build, and he was just like, oh, hold on. And he's like, and we're like, what do you mean? Yeah, I remember looking at the BCS code and like seeing like, well, there's totally a branch here that can delete like it was, I think you're right, like an unbounded end key. Like if you didn't have an end key, like it would just like nuke through the entire row. But we never really we never got like an answer at how it could get to it. Like this stuck out to me because it was one of the few times where we had like a major outage and we didn't actually know like what caused it. Like we knew that there was a special build. We knew that like if you had an unbounded end key that it could do this. We had no idea why or how we were hitting this unbounded end key. And like it just resulted in like guards being put up everywhere.
Like, how did this, like, the issue first become like come across your radar?
I'm
like customer complaint.
I think it was brought up by a customer because we didn't.
I imagine it was like that was almost like the de facto flow that happened. Customer would see something and would be like, "Oh, go tell ops," and then
it's like
fail over. It was like always the default.
We had like metrics ingested like 10 minutes ago, and they all disappear. And they disappeared.
You know, it's funny. So I'll just say, like, from that perspective, I will say a lot of no. It's actually on the opposite side of it. Not even to blame the customer success side of it. There were a lot of processes that were expected of the customer success to be able to investigate things that was not an easy process to do. So like, even though it might not be related to this particular issue, a lot of times when we would fail over to another mirror, like there would be an ask from ops or from the engineering team, whoever was on call, to say, hey, can you log into the non-serving system and tell me what the data looks like? And it was like a whole long convoluted process to like get into the non-serving mirror and be able to have them up at the same time, because you couldn't just go to the URL and see it, right? There's like a lot of steps you had to follow just to be able to access it.
And then, so the engineering team from there takes a look, right? And basically sees that metrics are failing. And then basically for the next 3 days, is it all hands on deck, like trying to solve this? Like what was the basically like progression of the incident?
So once we figured out what it was, and nobody figured it out until Brent came online, because nobody knew to look at those metrics, right? It was like it was it was like the classic case of like, everything was in Brent's head. And no fault to that guy. He built everything, so he kind of knew where everything was. Once we kind of knew what it was, I just remember that we were suspect of the special build, but like we didn't do anything immediately, and we just had it basically drain the SSD tier immediately and then fail over. And we observed it happening a couple more times over the next day while I think a new build was being made.
So go talk about that a little bit more, like the the difficulty you were having while you're navigating the data. So like, especially around like logs or metrics, like did you know where to look?
I mean, I would say we had no idea where to look. Like, because like initially when customers complain about missing data, your first instinct is, like Jason said, fail over. Like we had known problems with like stale caches, where like, oh, we're supposed to broadcast out index updates. We had metrics we checked for like those broadcast misses and things like that. So, typically like Jason said, CS is asked to go fail over and then told to go check manually. And that's like a painful as hell process. Like there are instructions to do it, but like literally it's like, oh yeah, here's the load balancer address. You need to copy your cookie and inject a cookie into your session and then go to this URL. And like, it's like, yeah, you can do it, but like, they're not friendly. And if you're asking people whose job it is to not be engineers, to go play engineer, like ops would come in and be like, go fail over and go check the other mirror and then tell us what you find, right? Because they don't want to do it because it sucks for them to do it. And that could take an hour. So there's more minutes being added on.
And to Mike's point, like there were so many things that could lead to the missing data or like the data not looking right. It could just be like the customer just changed the formatting of their metrics and it just blew up cardinality, which made the data not return because there was just a plethora of metrics that it needed to scan in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So then it was like, now we have to like go sign in and check the fire hose of all the metrics and take a sample and then like manually look at the list and then try to figure out what looks and stands out.
Imagine you've got a run book for like missing data and it's not go check the databases to make sure they shrunk. It's like turn on the fire hose and inspect the points and look for indexes that might be bad. And then that might cause queuing. Check index loads to see if there's a bunch of stuff loading. Check database pressure to see if there's pressure on the database. Check the non-serving mirror to see if the data is even there because maybe it just hasn't been ingested yet. Maybe it's a sparse metric and they don't realize it's sparse. So like you go through all these steps and you're looking at like your customer up dashboards that kind of cover everything. And like,
is it a querying problem? Is it an ingestion problem? Like, is the data?
And then on the customer side, they have proxies, and their proxies could be blocking. If they have too many point tags, if they have bad point tags, the proxies will block them, right? And so now you've got to go check the customer side of things, and like by the time you're done, an hour and a half, 2 hours has gone by. You've checked all the charts you think you need to check, and you don't even have alerts around half of these things. And so you're like, I don't even know where to begin looking. And so it really was like, okay, so, like when you get to that end of that trail, and you're like, there's still something wrong. Like we don't see index loading, we don't see back pressure on FTB, we don't see bad indexes. We don't see the stream going crazy. We don't see a drop off in ingestion rate. It's just a missing chunk. You're like, okay, let's call Brent because he'll know where to look. And you tell him all of this investigation. He hears it all and he's like, oh, I know of 10 more systems and 10 more things to check. Hold on. And so it's like, man, it would have been great to know those things up front or know that these. this is when we discovered some dashboards existed that nobody knew existed, because they were Brent's like personal dashboards that he didn't share with anyone. He didn't think they were important for anyone, because they were just like, oh, but this was BCS, our buffer copy system, which basically compressed, aligned, and moved data around the memory tier, and then flushed it down into SSD, and then eventually pushed it off into S3. And so he's like, nobody really cares about those metrics. Those are like really deep engineering metrics. And then sure enough, in the chart, the C space region is like all the compressed data in memory. It goes from being like, you know, like I think 28 gigs was how big it could get. Went from 28 gigs down to like 1 gig in less than a second. And he's like, oh, this is like a massive delete of data. Like it's gone. And so like the reason I picked this is because like for something like CtrlStack, where if I had seen that there was a problem, it would have been nice to have a metric and say like, or even a commit or something, because like we check that, like, are there commits that were made recently? You know, like I have some metrics that show inflections, but they don't show the right thing. Is, can I let a system scan through all those metrics for me? Because the time it took for all of us to go through all of the charts, because like, you know, we have a war room channel, and it's like, you know, Vasily, you're checking these things, Mike is checking these things, you know, and like, customer success, like Jason, he's going to be interfacing with the customers. And hours means you have multiple deletions happening in that time, because he comes in, he's like, hey, look, like something is nuking the data. Whereas, you know, CtrlStack, for me, I was like, could have searched all of our metrics, or at least the pertinent ones related to the hot path, in a fraction of a second. And we could have come back and been like, hey, none of these show problems. But I do see some commits by Brent for a build that was released and put on this one tenant and on this one database. And so like those kinds of things would have been like super helpful.
So let's, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but like, let's just surface back and like think about like, or like just discuss a little bit like what we're currently building at CtrlStack and like how it resolved this, both from like the traditional view, but also that point that Vasily just had there too. Like we center a lot about commits for sure, but like how, you know, I feel like CtrlStack can actually help showing change outside of Git commits. So like, I feel like there's stuff there that we could use CtrlStack for, even, you know, to detect change, you know, that was kind of like shoehorned in on the side. So
yeah, I mean, you know, we ended up having an entire classification of alerts called Brent alerts. And most of them were things like, like we didn't have a good change system, right, at Wavefront. Like everything was metrics first. Like you wanted to do logs, you were told no, metrics. You wanted to do events, you were told no, metrics, unless it was very lightweight events as it related to a metric. So what we did is we put Telegraph on all the hosts, and we had them for certain files and directories. We would monitor the last modified time of the files. And so like in the
agent.
Yeah, and so this is something we added in our agent, right? Where you can actually just say, look at these files and tell me when they change and what changed about them, versus like all we got out of metrics was, hey, the timestamp changed, which would happen like if somebody ran Ansible to update stuff, it would change like, oh, you get an alert for like 800 files changed because all of their timestamp changed. But you're like, but it was so disconnected from everything. It's like, I have the alert, but now I have no context of why it's firing, because there was no attached change. You know, like at least with us in our underlying graph, if I saw that, I could say, hey, can you give me the change impact of this change? Like, why did the files change? And it would find backwards that like, oh, you know, Vasily ran the action for updating the files through this script. And so I would have context that Vasily was doing something, and I could ask him, hey, why did all these files change? You know, at Wavefront, or just in a typical metrics environment, you have this very disjoint, like, I have an alert, I have a metric, but I don't have who did it, I don't have why they did it, I don't have the related changes to it, I don't know any related logs. I mean, the best metrics can do right now is point you at a log file if the host names line up and a time range, but they can't really give you anything deeper than that. There's no deeper enrichment in there. And that's kind of like what I think CtrlStack solves in this problem, because if we had those kind of file system changes, we would have known immediately, hey, BCS changed on a host, and change impact would have shown it was changed by Brent. We would have known Brent changed it. I still don't even know when the build got put there. I think it had been put in there within the last day or so. But I mean, we had that happen all the time. We had hosts get disconnected from ASGs. We had, configurations changed, and then we would go run Terraform or Ansible, and it would be like, hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's out of date. And we were like, why is it out of date? And it would turn out that somebody went in and made a manual change, and didn't port it back to the systems of record. And so we actually had outages and problems where we would run conformance. Somebody wouldn't check and realize that they were about to obliterate like an auto scaling group change that was made as part of fixing another customer's problem. Like middle of the night, Brent sees it and he's like, "Oh, we need to scale the cluster up." He changes the minimum and maximum size of an ASG up. Next day, our ops Terraform conformance runs and says, "Hey, this auto scaling group is way bigger than it should be. Want me to downsize it?" And you're like, "Yeah, go ahead." And then the incident starts all over again.
It was like an outage, like a Hydra, right? Like you chop off the head and two grow back, right? Like it's like you have a momentary outage, like temporary data loss, and then you go like nothing happens for the next 8 hours, and then you have another data loss. Yep. Customers hate that. I wonder why.
I wonder why too. Well, this is cool, guys. Well, thank you, everybody here for sharing your story there.
Yeah, make sure you get my good side.
Well, I put the side you put up there, so it's the only. There you go. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for your time. I'll see y'all.